My name is Raymond R. Brown. I'll be operating the video equipment for this deposition. My address is 1714 Corcoran Street, Washington, D.C. I'm employed by Ray Brown and Associates and representing Interim Court Reporting. This deposition is being taken pursuant to notice in case number 0277, entitled Universal City Studios Incorporated et al. Versus Corley, before the U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York. The witness today is Mr. Jack Valenti. Today is June 6, 2000. We're at the offices of Proskauer Rose LLP in Washington, D.C. Time is indicated electronically on the lower portion of the television screen, currently 8:45:30 seconds. This time, counsel will identify themselves and indicate which party they represent. The court reporter will then identify herself, and I will administer the oath to the witness.
Good morning. I'm Scott Cooper of Proskauer Rose LLP for the plaintiffs and representing Mr. Valenti in this deposition. Mark, you want to identify yourself?
Oh, Mark Litvak, counsel for the Motion Picture Association of America.
Edward Hernstead, Frankfurt Garbus, Klein & Sells for defendant.
Martin Garbus, Frankfurt Garbus, Klein & Sells for the defendants.
Let me note for the record that this deposition was arranged for the convenience of Mr. Garbus and Mr. Hernstead, and at their express request to commence this morning at 8 a.m. Here in Washington. We've gone to a lot of trouble to accommodate them and be here. We are now starting at 8:45. The court reporter they arranged for just arrived. They themselves didn't arrive until 8:30. I also note for the record that Mr. Valenti is here at considerable personal inconvenience. He is not feeling well this morning and has some kind of bug. He is here to proceed with this deposition, notwithstanding that. My understanding is we're going to go until noon so that Mr. Garbus and Mr. Hernstead can fly back to New York.
Perhaps we can stay for an hour later if Mr. Valenti is up to it.
Well, we understood.
We'll let Mr. Valenti decide that.
We understood you.
May I finish? With respect to this morning, we took a 6:30 flight down, which should have gotten us here plenty of time. The weather held us up down in LaGuardia, which is why we're half an hour late.
Madam Reporter, if you'd identify yourself, I'll swear the witness.
Roxanne Easterwood with NRM Reporting.
Mr. Valenti, would you raise your right hand, please?
I beg your pardon?
Would you raise your right hand, please?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. We're on the record, gentlemen.
Mr. Valenti, who are the members of the DVD CCA?
I don't know.
Do you know who the DVD CCA is?
No.
Do you know who issues the licenses to the hardware manufacturers that play DVDs?
No.
Do you know who issues the licenses to the replicators that make DVDs from the films that are submitted to them?
No, I do not.
Have you ever met anybody at the DVD CCA?
Not that I'm
Calls
aware
for
of.
speculation.
Do you know what that entity is at all?
No, I don't.
Do you know who controls the licenses for DVDs?
No, I don't.
Have you ever been advised by your attorneys who controls the licenses for DVDs?
Objection calls for attorney-client communication, and expressly so, I'll note.
You know the name of the defendant in this case?
I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Well, what is your best recollection of what's the defendant's name?
2600?
Now, does the name Goldstein mean anything to you?
No.
Does the name Corley mean anything to you?
How do you spell it?
C-O-R-L-E-Y.
No.
Never heard those names before?
Mm-mm.
Now, what does 2600 do?
Well, one thing they do is make T-shirts with my picture on it.
And do you know who makes the hardware for DVDs?
No, I don't.
Have you ever had any discussion with the hardware makers of DVDs about piracy?
No. That I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any discussions I've had.
Do you know how DECSS works?
Not really.
Do you know when it was first posted on the internet?
I don't recall.
Is there any document that would refresh your recollection?
I'm not aware of any.
Do you know when Mr. Goldstein allegedly, or 2600 allegedly first posted DECSS?
No,
Let me
I
just
don't.
make a point here that I believe should be clear, and that is to the extent that the answer to any of the questions Mr. Garbus asks is known to you only through communications from counsel. You should not provide the substance of those communications in answer to the question.
Okay.
Can you tell me something about the relationship between the MPAA and the 8 plaintiffs in this lawsuit?
I don't understand what you mean. What do you mean the relationship?
Do you know who the plaintiffs are?
Plaintiffs are member companies of the association.
And does the MPA on their behalf act in anti-piracy matters?
Yes, we do.
And you, for example, how long have you been the head of the MPAA?
34 years.
And during the course of time, you testified before Congress?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
I haven't any idea.
More or less?
A lot.
More or less than 1,000?
Oh, no, I haven't testified 1,000, but a lot.
300?
I haven't any idea.
And you've also, over those 34 years, met with senators to discuss MPAA matters?
From time to time, yes.
And you have appeared before subcommittees of the Congress to testify about DMCA and other related matters.
Yes.
And you have been on television both with respect to your role as MPAA president and in your previous life.
Yes.
And could you just tell us for a moment what your previous life consisted of?
It's ambiguous.
Hmm?
It's
Well,
ambiguous.
You know.
But before I was named Chief Executive Officer of MPA and MPAA, I was Special Assistant to the President of the United States for 3 years.
And during the course of that time, were you on television?
Yes,
And were you quoted in the press?
more than I chose to be,
And have you been quoted in the press since you've been the head of the MPAA?
a number of times.
When you say a number of times, would you agree with me it's been thousands and thousands of times?
I can't give a number. I haven't any idea, and I hesitate to give you a precise number because I don't know.
And in addition to testifying before Congress, have you spoken before other groups in the last 35 years? University?
Yes.
What kind of groups are those?
Conferences, seminars, colleges, universities, various organizations in broadcasting and cable, etc.
And you do that each year? And,
I beg your pardon?
and you do that each year, and you have been doing it each year for most of the 34 years, and you've been the head of the MPAA.
Yes.
And again, I presume, could we assume that you speak at least 100 times a year, and over 34 years, that's...
No, not that much, no. I don't speak 100 times a year.
Can you give me an estimate?
100 times a year would be 9 times a month. I don't do it.
Can you give me your best
I don't know.
approximation?
I haven't any idea. I couldn't give you a number. I just don't know.
Now, you testified before Congress on the DMCA legislation,
Yes, sir.
and you've issued a number of statements about that legislation,
Yes.
and you've issued a number of statements concerning this particular case,
Probably.
and you've issued a number of statements concerning the Santa Clara case, the DVD CCA case.
Assumes facts, not evidence. You mean him?
Yes. You were the MPA, or you on behalf of the MPA?
What was this?
Ambiguous and compound.
I didn't understand the question.
Could you please read it to me again?
You've issued a number of statements
I
concerning...
can't hear you, dear. I'm sorry.
You've issued a number of statements concerning the... I can't pronounce the name. Clara case, DVD...
DVD
Santa Clara.
Santa Clara case. What is the question?
That was the question. You've issued a number of statements concerning the...
DVD case in Santa Clara. Against...
DVD case in Santa Clara?
Yes.
I don't know anything about it.
You don't know anything about a lawsuit that's been filed in Santa Clara by DVD CCA against individuals who allegedly had DECSS or downloaded DECSS?
Not to my knowledge.
Today's the first time you've heard of a DVD CCA case?
Excluding any conversations with counsel,
Yeah.
it would be the same admonition with
Yeah.
respect to any of these issues.
Probably, yes.
In other words, only through counsel.
No, no, counsel. That's not an appropriate question.
Sure it is.
No, it isn't. Now, if you want to go off the record and have a conversation about how to inquire of a witness without intentionally intruding on the attorney-client privilege, I'd be happy to do that.
We'll get a ruling. Now, with respect to a DVD that's been de-encrypted by DECSS, have you ever seen one?
Have I ever seen a DVD encrypted?
De-encrypted by DECSS.
No, I haven't.
Has anyone ever told you that a DVD has been de-encrypted by DECSS?
I don't recall.
Has anyone ever told you that they had ever seen on the internet a DVD de-encrypted by DECSS?
I don't recall.
Do you know whether or not any of the defendants in this case ever de-encrypted a DVD through DECSS?
I'm not aware.
When you say you're not aware, does that mean you don't know?
That's a good synonym.
Okay. And when you said before you don't recall, did that also mean you don't know?
Well, I don't recall when, meaning I don't recall. I mean, that's
So there's a
the
difference.
simple declarative English sentence. I don't recall.
So there's a difference in your mind between I don't recall and I'm not aware.
Is this a
Well, I
semantic
think. Excuse me.
discussion?
Excuse me. No, I just want to know where we go with respect to the questions.
Well, the answer is I'm fairly informed about the mother tongue, and seems to me I don't recall or I'm not aware. It means I have a vague understanding of it, and I'm not sure.
Thank you. Are there any documents that you could use to refresh your recollection as to whether or not you know if this defendant is whether anyone has ever seen this defendant take a DVD and de-encrypt it through DECSS?
Would you read back the question, please?
Thank you. Are there any documents that you could use to refresh your recollection as to whether or not you know if this defendant is, whether anyone has ever seen this defendant take a DVD and de-encrypt it through DECSS?
I'm sorry, because I've got 102 fever, and it's affecting my ears. I just did not hear the young
Could you
lady.
read it back more loudly,
Do you want
please?
to take a break from the deposition?
No, this is fine. I'm going to do the best I can, and when I find out I can't go anymore, I'll tell you. But right now, I want to continue this. I didn't understand the question. I'm so sorry.
Okay, let me rephrase it to you
Yeah,
again.
please do.
Do you have any documents, or have you seen any documents, that could refresh your recollection as to whether or not Goldstein ever de-encrypted a DVD through DECSS?
I'm not aware of any documents.
Have you ever seen any documents which have ever indicated that anyone has made a copy of a DVD through DECSS after getting the DECSS from Goldstein?
I'm not aware of any.
To your knowledge, has anyone at the MPA ever reported to you that any of the Goldstein sites have led to any copies of any DVDs?
Excluding any conversations you had with counsel.
Yeah. If that happened, it was with my counsel, with my lawyers.
So, do you have any independent recollection now?
No.
Now, have you seen any documents which have indicated to you that anybody has made a copy of DECSS and then used that to de-encrypt a DVD?
I'm not aware of such documents.
Have you ever seen a document which says that anyone used any information from Goldstein's 2600.com to de-encrypt a DVD through DECSS?
I'm not aware.
Have you ever seen any such documents that relate to that?
Not that I'm aware of.
And with respect to Mr. Goldstein or 2600.com's linking and the other sites that they link to, has anyone ever told you that anyone has ever made a copy of a DVD through de-encryption by DECSS as a result of the information they got from the channels, from the websites that were linked to Goldstein?
Would you read back the question, please?
With respect to Mr. Goldstein or 2600.com's linking and the other sites that they link to, has anyone ever told you that anyone has ever made a copy of a DVD through de-encryption through DECSS as a result of the information they got from the channels, from the websites that were linked to Goldstein?
I don't recall.
Now, with respect to a DVD that has been de-encrypted through DECSS, can you fast forward it?
I don't know.
Can you edit such a DVD?
Ambiguous.
Can you edit a DVD that has been deconstructed through DECSS?
Ambiguous.
My answer is I don't know.
Can you edit a DVD that has been de-encrypted through DECSS?
Ambiguous.
I don't know.
Has anyone ever told you that you can edit a DVD through DECSS?
I have no recollection of that.
Do you know what the Linux machine is?
Assumes facts, not in evidence.
I beg your pardon?
I said it assumes facts, not in evidence.
Go ahead, sir.
I've heard of Linux.
And what is it?
As I understand, it's an open source system that a number of computer users use in their computers.
And when you say a number of computer users, does that relate to personal computers, business computers?
No, I haven't any idea.
And when you say an open source system, what does that mean?
Well, to me, it means free to anybody that wants to use it.
Now, do you know whether or not Linux in 1999 was trying to create a system whereby DVDs could be played on the Linux operating system?
It assumes facts, not in evidence. There is no Linux as an entity, as we've discussed in, I think, every one of the depositions that we've been together in. And it also asserts facts inconsistent with the record.
Go ahead, sir.
The answer is I don't know.
Can I hear the question again?
Do you know whether or not Linux in 1999 was trying to create a system whereby DVDs could be played on the Linux operating system? Objection. It assumes facts.
Do you know
not-
whether or not Linux users were trying to create an operating system that played DVDs on that operating system?
Ambiguous.
The answer is I don't know.
Do you know whether or not the person who first published the DECSS code was a Linux user?
I have no idea.
Do you know the purpose for which DECSS was originally created?
All I know is it's a violation of the law.
Is it your understanding that it's a violation of the law if the DECSS was created to create an operating system or to be part of an operating system for Linux users?
Assumes facts, not in evidence. It's an incomplete hypothetical.
Go ahead.
Doesn't make any difference. The DMCA is quite clear, great clarity, that anyone who circumvents an encryption is violating the law.
And if anyone is using DECSS, which they get from another source, namely Linux users, to play DVDs, it's your opinion that that's against the law?
Same objections. Also calls for a legal conclusion.
I believe it is very much against the law.
So that if any system plays a DVD without a license from DVD-CCCA, that, in your estimation, is against the law?
It's ambiguous. It's an incomplete hypothetical. Assumes facts, not in evidence, and it calls for a legal conclusion.
Go ahead.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but I believe it's a violation of the law. The law is very clear and very plain.
And it is very clear. Let's assume I buy a DVD, pay a price on it. Then I play it on a piece of hardware or a computer software that doesn't have which company doesn't have a license from DVD-CCA. Is it your view that that's against the law?
This witness is not here to testify as a legal expert. Your questions ask for him to draw legal conclusions on scant information.
Go ahead, sir.
I believe it's against the law.
So your understanding of the law then is that the only people who can play DVDs are those people who play it on licensed software or hardware?
All I do know is that no one can, with impunity, circumvent an encrypted DVD. The law is plain and clear and unambiguous.
And if a Linux user takes DECSS, which he did not get through his own reverse engineering or through any attempt of circumvention on his side, and uses that on a Linux system to play a DVD, it's your view that that's against the law?
Incomplete hypothetical. Assumes facts, not in evidence, and it's calls
Thank
for a
you.
legal conclusion.
Mr.
Jack.
Valente?
I beg your pardon?
Let's have
Can you
the
answer the
question
question?
read back,
Yeah,
please.
could you give me the question again, please?
If a Linux user takes DECSS, which he did not get through his own reverse engineering or through any attempt of circumvention on his side, and uses that on a Linux system to play a DVD, it's your view that that's against the law?
Anytime that you circumvent an encryption, you're violating the law.
Even if you're using it and you have not done the reverse engineering and you have not done the circumvention?
That's,
It assumes facts, not in evidence. I think it's internally inconsistent and unintelligible.
Go ahead.
the answer, I go back again. The law doesn't make any such exceptions. The law is clear.
So it doesn't matter whether or not you actually do the reverse engineering or whether you see what the reverse engineer has done and then distribute that information to another party.
Same objections.
The DMCA doesn't make any exception for reverse engineering for DVDs.
Would you like some?
I'm not talking now about reverse.
water.
Yes, I
Mr.
would.
Valente, I'm
I
not
don't want
talking-
the ice in, just plain water.
I'm not now talking about the actual reverse engineering. Let's assume man A does the reverse engineering. Man B posts it on the internet. Man C then takes that information, and he's a Linux user, and he uses that information to play a DVD on a Linux operating system. And the Linux operating system has no license from the DVD-CCA. Is it your view that that's against the law?
Yes.
Same objections.
Okay. Now, did you testify before Congress on...
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
whether or not the MPAA's position was that Sony v. Betamax...
This is cold water. I can't drink cold
Okay.
water. I just because
Mark,
of
would you see if we can get something that's
just plain
room temperature,
if they
something
have
tepid?
if they have a plain Evian or something that's not out of a refrigerator, I can't. With my throat right now, I can't drink anything cold.
Do you know what Divx is? D-I-V-X?
I've heard of it, but I'm not sure.
Do you know how Divx copies are made?
No,
Assumes facts, not evidence.
Do you know what CSS cat is?
no,
Do you know what CSS auth is?
no.
Do you know of any other de-encryption systems other than DECSS?
No.
During any 1 year, let's say last year, how many pirated copies of DVDs are seized by the MPA or people acting on their behalf?
I don't know.
Would it be in the millions?
I have no idea.
Has anyone ever told you that for the year 1999, any one copy that was ever received originated from a DECSS de-encryption?
The answer is I don't know.
For the year 2000, has anyone ever told you that there has ever been a copy of a DVD made through the use of DECSS?
I don't know.
Has anyone ever told you that they have seen a movie on the internet that was which movie was de-encrypted through DECSS?
I'm not aware.
Have you
Thank-
ever
perfect.
testified before Congress
Thank you.
concerning the number of copies, pirated copies of DVDs that were made through the use of DECSS?
I don't recall.
Now, did you also testify before Congress that the fair use exception was not cut out by the DMCA?
Yes, the concept of fair use is intact in DMCA.
Tell me how that is.
Calls for a legal conclusion.
Well, I don't know except that the concept is intact.
And what is the concept of fair use as you understand it?
Means that libraries or school teachers can play movies in their classroom for educational purposes.
Do they have to get permission from the DVD CCA?
No,
Calls for a legal conclusion. It's misleading. Assumes
can-
facts, not in evidence.
they can go
Did
down
you
to
intend to ask about the DVD CCA?
Pardon?
You intended to ask that question with regard to permission from the DVD CCA?
From whoever you have to get permission for.
I think you may have. You have to get permission from the MPA.
No.
what's
Okay.
the question?
I apologize.
No, I knew what I was saying.
Okay.
Go ahead. Can you read the question back?
Do they have to get permission from the DVD?
I can't hear you.
Do they have to get permission from the DVD CCA?
It's misleading, ambiguous, assumes facts, not in evidence.
Go ahead, sir.
You can go to a Blockbuster store and get a DVD player in your classroom. Libraries have DVDs which say check out to people who want to look at them.
Can you fast forward on a DVD?
Yeah, I think you can.
And if you have, let's say, advertisements in the beginning, can you fast forward past those advertisements so that you can go straight to the movie?
I'm not aware of DVDs that have advertisements. What do you mean advertisements?
Advertisements for other movies.
Yeah, you can fast forward through that.
And can you edit the DVD so as to take off information to put it on a VCR?
Well, that means you have to decrypt, and that's against the law.
So in other words, there's no way of taking anything off a second, a tenth of a second from the DVD without it being against the law.
Calls for a legal conclusion.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm just saying to you, as simply as I can assert it, that anytime that you decrypt or try to decrypt a DVD, the DMCA is very clear about that you can't do it. It's against the law.
If you use DECSS to defeat regional coding, is that also against the law?
Assumes facts, not in evidence. It's an incomplete hypothetical.
Well, the answer is any time that you circumvent an encryption for whatever reason, you are breaking the law.
Is regional coding encryption?
I'm not sure how that works.
Is regional coding a security device?
Calls for a legal conclusion.
I'm not sure.
If a person buys a DVD in France, can he show it? An American person goes to France, buys a DVD, comes back to this country, and puts it onto his DVD. Will it play?
Incomplete hypothetical.
Or will regional coding stop it from playing?
Compound.
I'm not sure.
What is the function of regional coding?
I think it's to combat parallel imports.
Now, can you make a backup copy of a DVD? If I buy a DVD and I want to play it in another, in my country home or in another room in my house, can I make a backup copy of a DVD?
If
Ambiguous.
Go ahead.
Is it physically possible?
Yes.
If it means decrypting, the answer is it's illegal to do that.
So it's illegal to make any second copies of a DVD.
Calls for a legal conclusion.
Yeah. Well, if in order to do that you have to decrypt, it's against the law.
So that if I want to, let's say, buy a DVD, leave it at home, but then want to play it on my Linux operating system when I'm traveling 3 hours later, your view would that would be against the law?
Incomplete hypothetical calls for a legal conclusion.
If you decrypt, it certainly is.
And if I wanted to listen in my car to the music of a DVD that's on a DVD track, and I had to de-encrypt to do that, your view that would be against the law?
Same objections.
If it means decrypting, yes, it's against the law.
And can you copy one song off a DVD to play on your car while you're driving? Or since you're de-encrypting, is that also against the law?
Same objections.
I'm not that familiar with the music industry.
Well, I'm talking about a DVD. I'm talking about a soundtrack or a piece of music that's on a DVD. If I want to take off a piece of that soundtrack and play it in my car radio, can I do that?
It's incomplete hypothetical calls for a legal conclusion. Assumes facts, not in evidence.
Go ahead.
In my judgment, if you have to decrypt to do that, it's illegal.
Is there any other way to do it beside decrypting?
Calls
Yeah.
for speculation.
Yes, you can buy another DVD.
So in other words, if you want to listen to the DVD in your car, you would have to buy another DVD for the car, or take that DVD to the car,
Calls for a conclusion.
right?
The answer is anytime you decrypt for whatever reason, you're breaking the law.
Now, do you know how many sites there were? Withdrawing. Do you know if anyone ever saw or downloaded DECSS from this defendant?
I don't
Asked
know.
and answered.
Do
I just
you
don't
know how many other sites withdrawn? Do you know whether there were any downloads from the 2600 site?
I don't know.
Do you know whether anyone ever saw the 2600 site, other than people in the employ of the MPAA?
I don't know.
Now, do you know what InfoSeek is?
What?
InfoSeek.
It's something on the internet.
Of the 8 plaintiffs, do you know which of the plaintiffs own search engines?
I don't know.
You know what a search engine is?
I have a vague idea.
What is your idea?
It searches the internet to find things.
Now, does the name Northern Lights mean anything to you?
Northern Exposure was a fine television program, but
Do you know of Northern Lights, one of the largest search engines on the internet?
Assumes
know.
facts, not evidence.
I don't know it.
Do you know Yahoo?
Yes, I know Yahoo.
And if you go to Yahoo, do you know how many references you get to DECSS?
I've never explored that.
Before the MPA filed this suit against Goldstein, did it determine whether any of the plaintiffs' search engines were leading viewers to mirror sites?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
I don't know.
Do you know whether or not AOL, which also operates as a search engine, contains any references to DECSS?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
I don't know.
Has anyone at the MPAA ever checked to see whether or not the search engines of these 8 plaintiffs go to mirror sites of DECSS directly?
I don't know.
Has anyone, to your knowledge, at the MPAA ever checked and seen whether or not, and to how many, DECS sites the search engines of the 8 plaintiffs linked to?
I don't know.
Has anyone ever told you that through the Disney search engine you can go directly to a mirror site, a DECS mirror site?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
I don't recall.
Based on your understanding of the law, if Disney is sending people to mirror sites, is that contributory infringement?
I have no idea.
You testified before about what constitutes a violation of the law. Is it a violation of the law for Disney to put up DECSS?
Ambiguous. Assumes facts, not evidence. It's incomplete,
Go ahead.
hypothetical, and calls for a legal conclusion.
I just don't know.
In other words, if it's illegal for Mr. Goldstein to do it, is it illegal for Disney to do it?
Same objections also calls for a conclusion, and it's argumentative.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think that anybody that posts a code breaker for DVD is violating the law.
And anybody who links to someone who posts DECS is also violating the law?
Yes.
Also calls for a legal conclusion.
And
I believe that. I believe they're violating the law.
so that if AOL posts to either a DECS site or someone who links to a DECS site, your view is that that violates the law.
Same objections.
Is that right, sir?
I believe so.
So that if Northern Lights or Google, who are search engines, refer any of their viewers to sites that either link to DECSS or have DECS mirror sites, then those search engines are working against the law as well.
Same objections, also ambiguous with respect to what you mean by refer in your question.
Link.
Then I'd ask you to restate the question because
Can I
I
hear
think
the
it's
question again?
unintelligible.
If Northern Lights or
Google, Google.
As in Barney.
if Northern Lights or Google do a search engine refer any of their viewers to sites that either link to DECSS or have DECSS mirror sites, then those search engines are working against the law as well.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm confused about the question. I just go back to first principles. That any time that you post anything that has to do with decrypting a DVD, you're violating the DMCA.
And do you know that the New York Times posts sites that link to mirror sites?
Ambiguous.
I'm not aware of anything New York Times is doing.
Would it be illegal, as you understand the law, if the New York Times Online referred to a site that posted DECSS?
I'm not sure what purpose is served by quizzing this lay witness on various legal scenarios You are asking now for more and more convoluted conclusions of law from a lay witness who doesn't purport to know the legal details, nor is he offered for that purpose or for any other. Yet he plainly calls for a legal conclusion.
I have the answer.
Anytime you post anything that tells people how to decrypt or circumvent an encryption, I don't think there's any question but you're violating the law.
Now, to your knowledge, has anyone tried to determine whether Northern Lights has violated the law?
I'm not aware, no.
Has anyone tried to determine whether the Disney search engines have violated the law?
I'm not aware.
Can you tell me how they chose to go after 2600.com rather than other sites or other search engines such as the Disney search engine or the Northern Lights search engine?
Ambiguous compound. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Go ahead, sir.
No.
Now, Mr. Cooper said that you, as I understood it, were not conversant in the law. Are you a lawyer?
No.
I said
Were you
what I
special
said, and that's
counsel
a
to-
mischaracterization of what I said.
I beg your pardon?
So your position then is you're a layman with respect to the law, as he said, and that you're not the person to be asked about legal questions. Is that right?
The witness hasn't asserted a position. I've asserted a position as counsel for the parties.
And may I hear the position that he asserted again?
I'm not sure what purpose is served by quizzing this lay witness on various legal scenarios. You're asking now for more and more convoluted conclusions of law from a lay witness who doesn't purport to know the legal details, nor is he offered for that purpose or for any other. It plainly calls for a legal conclusion.
So your attorney said that you do not know the legal details of the DMCA and how it is to be interpreted. Is that correct?
What I said is plain on the record. You're asking this witness whether he can say whether what you just said is what I just said. Is that really what you're asking? For him to draw conclusions about your characterization of what I just said on the record? Is that useful?
And I think so. Now, you're the one who testified before Congress, did you not, on the DMCA?
I was one of those, yes.
And you testified on the effect of Betamax on the DMCA and how it should be interpreted?
Betamax?
Yeah.
Are you referring to the case 17, 19 years ago?
Yes. And haven't you in your testimony before Congress referred to the Sony against Betamax case?
I may have. I'm not aware of it, though. That's in the Mesozoic era. That's almost 20 years ago.
And did you testify within the last 5 years on Betamax before Congress when they were considering the DMCA?
Ambiguous.
I don't recall at all testifying about Betamax.
Do you recall issuing any statements about Betamax?
In the
Ambiguous.
In the last 5 years?
Yeah.
I'm not aware.
Now, Mr. Cooper described you as a lay witness. What do you understand that term to mean?
I am not a lawyer.
So, in other words, a lay witness is anyone other than a lawyer.
You're asking him to draw a legal conclusion or
I'm
to
asking
speculate
him.
about what
I'm
I meant by
asking
the
him.
term?
You have called him a lay witness. This is the man who's the head of the MPAA, who for 34 years has been the head of the MPAA, who has testified endless times before various groups about his legal interpretation of the DMCA, and you don't permit him to answer questions about the DMCA. Do you find that surprising?
I'll tell you what, if you want to spend the time in this deposition arguing about issues, I'll be glad to. Well, let me say that I will describe my meaning in my statements. Why don't you ask the witness percipient testimony on issues that he is here to answer on?
Let's mark as exhibits. First, the October 28, 1999 statement by Jack Valenti to the Subcommittee on Telecommunications, Trade, and Consumer Protection, Committee on Commerce, U.S. House of Representatives. We'll mark as Exhibit 2, and I'll give you copies of this. A letter from Mr. Valenti to Ms. Terry Tang, dated June 30th, 1998. And enclosed in that letter is a document entitled Chronology of WIPO Treaty and Implementing Legislation. We'll also enclose as a letter dated March 31, 2000, from Mr. Valenti to David Carson, a lawyer, the general counsel of an organization named in the letter. And then we'll mark as Exhibit 4 a document to which Mr. Valenti is a signatory. Pardon me, to which the Motion Picture Association of America is a signatory. It's as of March 31, 2000, when Mr. Valenti was the head of that organization.
I haven't yet seen the documents, so I can't speak to the characterizations of counsel. I will note for the record that I believe he misspoke with respect to the third document. I think he said something about it being enclosed. I believe what was intended was that the third reference document was to be marked as Exhibit 3 rather than the inference that it was enclosed with Exhibit 2.
I'll let the record speak for itself.
And why don't we take a short break, actually?
Okay, I'll give you.
Off the record, the time.
Mr. Valenti, directing your attention.
We're back on the record. The time is 9:40.
Mr. Valenti, directing your attention to Exhibit number 24.
This is 23.
And for the record, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think the renumbering of these documents from what you put on the record occurred off the record, so you might want to just note that they've been renumbered in agreement between counsel.
They have now been renumbered so as to be consistent
This is good number 24.
with the previous deposition, so it's 23, 24, 25, and 26 rather than 1, 2, 3, and 4, but I'll identify each document when I refer to it. With respect to Exhibit 24, which is a letter to Ms. Tang at the New York Times, do you know who Mr. Attaway is?
Yes.
Do you have a copy for me, counsel?
Sure. And who is Mr. Attaway?
He is Senior Vice President and Washington General Counsel of the MPAA.
And I direct your attention, and the letter starts off with, Jack Valenti asked me to send you the attached material relating to implementation of the WIPO treaties. Is that right?
That's what it says here, yes.
And do you recognize the document that is attached?
I never really saw it. I asked Mr. Attaway to send this lady information about the WIPO treaties.
And is that and the information you sent? That's the position of the MPAA. Is that right?
Well, I haven't read this, so I don't know.
Well, direct your attention to page 7216. If you see it in the lower
7216.
right-hand corner.
All right.
Microphone might get a chance, Mr. Cooper.
Section 11. This is a letter.
All right.
Is that the position of the MPAA? And isn't that the position that you have testified in Congress was the position of the MPAA?
The Lax Foundation calls for speculation. Take a moment to read it, please.
Well, this is a legal paragraph that Mr. Attaway has sent to this lady, which summarizes the 1984 Supreme Court decision. and it's not MPA policy. I guess that's Supreme Court policy.
It says, will Section 1201 overrule the Supreme Court Betamax decision? And then it says no, and then goes on. Wasn't that the position you took in testifying before Congress?
You're asking whether he said what's contained in
Yes.
those two sentences?
Yes, in substance.
I don't know.
Do you know what you testified in Congress relative to the effect of Betamax on the DMCA?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
I have written about 1 million words,
Does this record...
and I haven't. And it is impossible to remember specific paragraphs out of 1 million words, that testimony and speeches. So the answer is, I don't know.
Does it refresh your recollection in any way as to what the MPA stated position was before the Congress when it testified about the DMCA?
You're asking whether this refreshes his recollection on that?
Right.
I don't know whether this section 11 here was part of my testimony before the DM.
I didn't ask you that. I said, does this refresh your recollection as to what the MPAA's position was before the Congress when it gave information concerning the effect...
No, please let him finish,
Yeah.
and then give me an opportunity to object.
All right, fine.
the Betamax decision and its interrelationship with Section 1201.
You no longer mean to be referring to his testimony. You're talking about any positions asserted by the MPA
Yes.
before Congress.
Yes.
Lacks foundation.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, what is it you want to know?
Do you know what the MPAA's position was before Congress with respect to the viability of the Betamax case and the relationship between the Betamax case and Section 1201?
Well, the Betamax case said that you could time shift for over-the-air free television. That's all it said. What else do you want to know?
Now try and answer my question. Can you repeat the question to the witness?
Do you know what the MPAA position was before Congress with respect to the viability of the Betamax case and the relationship between the Betamax case and Section 1201?
He has answered your question.
Go ahead, sir.
What's the question?
Yeah, what's the question?
Read the question again.
Do you know what the MPAA position was before Congress with respect to the viability of the Betamax case and the relationship between the Betamax case and Section 1201?
He's answered your question. Do you have a follow-up?
Would you allow the witness to answer?
Would you read back his answer, please?
Well, the Betamax case said that you could time shift for over-the-air free television. That's all it said. What else do you want to know?
I asked you whether or not, and I direct your attention to paragraph 3 of Section 11, which says, quote, the Betamax case would remain good law even after the enactment of Section 1201. Wasn't that the MPA's position before Congress
Are you asking whether this sentence refreshes his recollection?
as to what the MPA's position was?
What the Betamax case said, according to my lawyers, was that time shifting for over-the-air free television was permissible. It said nothing about cable. It said nothing about encrypted material. And so what Mr. Attaway is saying here, it seems to me, is that Section 1201 does not override the Betamax case.
And what he's saying, the Betamax case would remain good law even after the enactment of Section 1201, you have testified substantively and substantially to that effect to Congress. Isn't that right?
Complex. Compound.
All I'm saying, Counselor, is that relying on my lawyer's interpretation, that the Betamax case was narrowly constructed. It only dealt with over-the-air free television time shifting. That's all you could copy. Period.
So you're saying that the entire Betamax case, as I understand it, as you understand it, was good law even after the enactment of Section 1201.
He's testified to his understanding. You're now trying to characterize it and extend it.
Go ahead, sir.
Calls
me-
for a legal conclusion.
I think what good law means is that the law is intact. And to the extent that you can time shift for free over-the-air television stations, period.
Did the Betamax case deal with the question of infringement,
Lacks foundation.
to your knowledge?
I don't recall. I don't know.
Did the Betamax deal with the question of copying material off TV and then making duplicate copies of the copies?
Lacks foundation.
I don't recall.
Do you know if the Betamax case talked about the number of infringing copies you could make from material bought in the store or material taken off TVs?
I don't
Lacks
recall.
foundation.
Do you know anything about what the Betamax case said with respect to infringement?
Other than what he's already testified
Right.
to.
I think I've testified what I believe is a summary of the Betamax case.
Do you know the Sega case?
The what?
SEGA case.
Ambiguous.
Sega against Accolade.
No, I don't know it.
Do you know any of the cases that follow from the Betamax case?
No.
And to your knowledge, did Mr. Attaway, by the way, did Mr. Attaway also testify before Congress?
From time to time.
And who is he is the Washington General Counsel for the MPAA?
Yes.
Is he the senior attorney?
In Washington.
And is there a senior
beg
attorney?
pardon?
I just want to make sure, it is at times difficult to tell whether Mr. Garbus has finished his question.
I'm sorry.
So if you'll pause for a
Yeah, I'm
moment,
sorry.
it'll give me an opportunity to
right,
interject
all right,
objections.
Now, do you recall ever having testified before Congress that the fair use exception that existed before 1201 is the same as the fair use exception that exists now?
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
Do you understand that did you testify before the Congress that the DMCA does not change fair use?
I think I did.
And the position of the MPAA is that the DMCA does not change fair use
The doctrine of fair use is still intact.
in every way.
Well, Counselor, I don't know what every way means.
Is there any way that you can think of that fair use is less intact after the DMCA than it was before?
Calls for a legal conclusion.
I don't know.
Has Mr. Attaway testified? By the way, before Mr. Attaway testifies, do you and he ever discuss what the subject of his testimony will be?
I don't recall.
Have you ever seen any copies of his testimony?
I may have, I may not have.
Now, were you present at any discussions within the MPAA concerning the effect of the DMCA on fair use?
Because of the possibility that such discussions might involve the attorney-client privilege, I'd ask you to answer yes or no to the question.
I don't know.
Now, did you have any discussions with the heads of any of the studios or anybody at the studios, the plaintiffs in this case, concerning fair use and the effect of the DMCA on fair use?
I'm not aware of any.
Is it fair to say that the MPA was one of the larger lobbying groups in the DMCA issue?
What do you mean by larger? You mean numbers of people?
Dollars, numbers of people?
Oh, no, I would say we're not.
Who were the others?
I have no idea, but We don't have a large staff.
How many people do you have here in Washington?
I have one person that handles Congress, one person, and I have Mr. Attaway.
And how much money does the MPA spend each year on lobbying?
No, I don't know.
What is the total MPA budget?
This year, approximately $25 million worldwide.
Do you know whether there are DECS sites overseas?
I don't know.
Do you know if the MPAA has tried to stop these DECS sites that are overseas?
Would you read back the question, please?
Do you know if the MPAA has tried to stop these DECS sites that are overseas?
I don't know.
Do you know if the MPA has tried to determine whether there is any hardware presently playing DVDs as a result of DECSS?
Ambiguous.
I don't know.
If you play a DVD on your CSS-equipped player, in other words, an appropriate player, and you use something called Speed Ripper. Have you ever heard of Speed Ripper?
No.
Have you ever heard of something called DOD?
No.
Do you know the names of any devices that can capture the digital signal without de-encryption?
Ambiguous.
I don't know.
Has anyone discussed the Steambox case with you?
Ambiguous.
Not to my knowledge.
Now, do you know what a DSL line is?
I believe it's a telephone line that gives you broadband access to the internet.
And what is a T3 line?
I don't know what a T3 line is.
And what is a T1 line?
A T1 line is a telephone that, a line that gives you faster access, I believe, to the internet.
Now, the DS line you said has broadband.
DSL?
DSL has broadband. And do you know in how many homes DSL is?
No.
Do you have a DSL line?
No.
Does the MPA have a DSL line?
No.
Does the MPA have a broadband line?
No.
You have a
The answer is
broadband line.
no.
Do any of your offices throughout the world have broadband lines?
Lax Foundation.
I don't know whether our Encino office has it or not.
Do you? But none of the others do. Is that right?
Well, a DSL line is not available.
A DSL line is not available.
Not to me in my home.
Do you have any idea when it will be available?
I have to ask Bell Atlantic about that.
What is your understanding of when broadband will be available?
Assumes
can't-
facts, not evidence.
Pardon? Excuse me?
Do I know?
Yeah.
I can't get an answer out of Bell Atlantic. Maybe you can. I can't.
And when you've asked them, have they said a year, 2 years, 3 years?
The answer is lately I've been unable to break through their automated
Wait.
phone service, and I've hang the phone up in frustration.
You mean Jack Valenti can't get through to the people at Bell?
That's exactly the truth. I can't get through.
And have you written any letters trying to find out when broadband would be available?
No.
Mr. Valenti?
No,
Has
I-
anyone at the MPA tried to find out when broadband would be available?
I'm not aware.
Do you have any idea whether or not it's going to be available within the next 2 years?
Do you have any idea where this is going as far as relevancy of the lawsuit is concerned?
Go ahead, sir.
The answer is I don't know.
So you don't know whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 2 years about when broadband comes in, is that right?
You're talking about Mr. Valenti's home, right?
No, we're talking about when it comes in to use in the United States.
Well, Mr. Valenti doesn't have that expertise. I could answer the question if you'd like to know.
No, I'm asking Mr. Valenti.
I don't know.
Have you ever issued any statements concerning when broadband would be available?
The answer is I don't recall.
Now, you understood when I was asking you questions before, I wasn't asking about your home. I was asking when it was available to people in the United States.
Are you asking whether that's the way Mr. Valenti understood your prior questions?
Because if not, I'll just ask them again. So that we're
Well, there are, as I understand it, in reading trade press, there are a number of homes that have broadband access now, and it's growing, but I don't know the precise numbers.
Do you have any sense whether it's, when you say homes, are there any other institutions, to your knowledge, that have broadband?
Ambiguous. Lex Foundation.
I have no idea.
Do you know whether the number of homes, do you know how much broadband costs now?
No.
Ambiguous.
Have you seen any information concerning the cost of broadband?
Ambiguous.
No, since I don't have it, I haven't had a chance to discuss the cost.
Now, when you say you don't have it, I'm not just talking about you. You've also tried to get it for the MPAA?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
No, I haven't personally tried.
And does the MPA have T3 lines?
Asked and answered.
I don't know what a T3 line is. If you explain it to me, maybe I could tell
Do
you.
you know what does the MPA have a DSL line?
Not to my knowledge.
And do you know anyone who does have a DSL line?
Not that I can recall.
Do you know anyone who has a broadband line?
Ambiguous.
The answer is I don't know.
Have you ever been in a house when anyone has said, let's look at the broadband?
No. I've been in a lot of houses, but nobody mentioned to me they got broadband. I never asked the question.
And I suspect you've been in a lot of houses, often with people of some substance.
Is this? It's just incredible to me that we've all gathered here at such inconvenience to have a discussion about Mr. Valenti's experience in other people's houses. This is not conceivably relevant to anything that he could properly testify to.
Go ahead, sir.
I've been in a number of people's houses from time to time, but I've never discussed broadband with them.
And have you ever discussed broadband with anyone? What broadband looks like, what you can see on broadband?
Ambiguous.
I can't recall specific conversations about it. I just don't remember.
And have you seen any projections as to how much broadband will be available in the next 2 years or 3 years in the United States?
Ambiguous.
I may have, but I don't remember.
Are there any documents that would refresh your recollection?
Documents? What documents?
MPA documents.
Oh, I don't know.
Do you know who Mr. Schumann is?
Schumann?
Yeah.
What's his first name?
Robert?
He's a great composer.
Well, this
I love his music.
Not this man's. He's an expert witness who has been retained by the MPAA and Proskauer. Do you know him at all?
I do not know him.
Have you ever seen any of his reports?
No,
Do you know whether he prepared a report?
I don't know.
Have you had any conversations with any of the people at the 8 major studios about any aspect of this litigation?
About Mr. Schumann?
About this litigation?
About?
Not Mr. Schumann. About any aspect of this litigation?
I don't recall.
Have you had any conversations with anyone at the DVD CCA about Mr. Schumann?
As I said, I don't even know what that is.
And how about Mr. Jacobson? Do you know him?
Jacobson? Who is Mr. Jacobson?
Off the record, excuse me. Is that his last name?
You mean my Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Oh, sure. I know him, of course.
And to your knowledge, has Mr. Jacobson ever told you that he had ever seen a DVD that have been de-encrypted through DECSS?
Would you read back the question, please?
I don't, excuse me.
I've asked the question be read back so that I can hear it again. I didn't understand it.
To your knowledge, has Mr. Jacobson ever told you that he had ever seen a DVD that had been de-encrypted by DECSS?
It's possible that the answer to that question could intrude on the attorney-client privilege. So you should answer the question yes or no.
I don't remember.
Now, you said any use of DVD that involves copying is illegal. Is that right?
I think what I said was, anytime you circumvent encryption, according to the DMCA, you're violating the law. That's what I said.
And you're also violating the law, are you not, if you copy DVDs without de-encrypting them?
It calls for a legal conclusion. It's an incomplete hypothetical.
Do you know how, let's use the term Asian pirates, how they copy DVDs?
What kind
Ambiguous.
of pirates?
Let's say Asian pirates or Hong Kong pirates. Do you know how most DVDs, pirated DVDs, are made?
No.
Compound.
Do you know that there are ways to copy DVDs by pirates without breaking the de-encryption code?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
I'm not aware of such.
Do you know what the major source of pirated copies come from which process they come?
Copies of
DVDs.
I don't remember.
Now, with respect to copying movies, you've spoken publicly about the use of camcorders to copy movies. Do you recall that?
In analog form, yes.
And you have indicated in your public statement that that's a major concern of the MPAA. Is that right?
It is a concern, yes.
And do you know how many copies of films, or how many films have been copied through the use of camcorders?
A lot.
And do you know if any of those films have been shown on the internet?
I don't know.
And when you say a lot, what is the basis for that judgment?
The answer is it's a large number, but I don't know the precise number.
Now, you said that the use of a DVD that is de-encrypted by DECSS or some other de-encryption terminology is illegal. Does that mean, yes?
What's the yes? Are you asking whether that's what
you've
he's
said that.
testified?
I just want to go on to the next question.
But what
I
I
want to
said
make
was,
clear.
and I'll repeat it again, that anytime you circumvent an encryption, you're violating a statute passed by the Congress.
Okay. Does this mean you can make a copy of a DVD if a licensed player did the de-encryption for you?
Calls for a legal conclusion. It's an incomplete hypothetical and it's ambiguous.
Go ahead.
I don't know.
Does this mean you can make a copy of a DVD if an unlicensed player did the de-encryption for you?
Same objections.
I don't know.
Does this mean that it's legal to make a copy of a DVD if an unlicensed player does the de-encryption?
Same objections.
Any time you circumvent an encryption, you're violating the law.
And that applies to whether the circumvention is on the DVD or whether the circumvention is on the hardware. Is that right?
Unintelligible. It's an incomplete hypothetical and calls for a legal conclusion.
Go ahead, sir.
The DMCA is pretty clear on that. The answer is if you circumvent an encryption,
Either on the
violating the law.
hardware or the software.
well, the answer is that I don't know, except that if it's on hardware and you're circumventing encryption, yeah, you're violating the law.
Now, and does it matter if you, as you understand the law, circumvent the encryption by reverse engineering or by the method of cryptography or by some other method?
Also calls for a legal conclusion. He's not here to testify as an expert an interpretation of the DMCA and its exceptions?
Go ahead.
I don't know.
Now, let me take a bathroom break if I may.
Off the record, the time is 10:07:42 seconds. We're back on the record. The time is 10:18:17 seconds.
Mr. Valenti, I show you a document marked Exhibit 27.
Yeah.
And it says blind copies to Fritz Attaway, who you've previously defined, Simon Barsky, who I know
Yes,
to be a lawyer at the MPAA, and Rich Taylor, who is he?
He is head of our public affairs department.
Brad Hunt.
Brad Hunt is chief technology officer.
And what is his position?
I beg your pardon?
And what does he do?
He's the chief technology officer.
And what does he do?
He deals in technology.
In other words, does he, for example, take DVDs and try and see the quality of a film that has been de-encrypted?
Lacks foundation.
I'm not aware of that. No.
Have you ever seen do you know anything about the quality of a film, a DivX film?
No.
Do you know anything about the quality of the film that has been de-encrypted through DECSS?
No.
Has anyone ever shown you a film that they have de-encrypted through DECSS?
Asked and answered.
No.
Now, do you know if anyone at the MPAA has made any tests concerning how long it takes to download a DVD and de-encrypt it through DECSS?
Not that I'm aware of.
Have you seen any newspaper articles that indicate how long it takes?
I may have, but I don't remember.
Let's go to Gilmore. Now, directing your attention to Exhibit 27.
Okay.
That letter is your letter, and that is your signature at the end?
It is.
And you say with respect to the third paragraph, the movie industry doesn't seek to eliminate the fair use doctrine. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You're asking
you
whether
say-
that's what the document says, right?
No, whether that's correct. What you said was correct.
Yes.
And you say that doctrine was constructed to make it easier for research, scholarship, commentary, and similar uses which do not harm the economic interests of copyright owners. Is that right?
The document so states. Are you asking whether he is recalling
Whether that's
that
his view.
statement
Is that your view?
today?
Yeah, today.
Yes.
You haven't changed your view.
No.
Okay. Now, in the last paragraph, you talk about the users of the Linux system.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
which pardon me. And excuse me.
I said yes.
And what that paragraph indicates that those Linux users who have licenses can appropriately play DVDs, and that's not illegal. Is that right?
The document speaks for itself. Are you asking him to agree with your characterization of the paragraph?
Surely.
Yeah. It says what it says.
Right. And that's what I said, right?
You're asking now for him to adopt
He's
your
agreed.
characterization of it.
Now, in the third paragraph, which is a letter you wrote 3 months ago, no, 3 months ago,
Third paragraph, yes.
you talk about the Betamax case.
Yes.
And in the last paragraph, you talk about Professor Lessig.
Yes.
Do you remember the example he used?
Could I ask, Mr. Valenti, that you slow down? I'm not sure what counsel means by third paragraph, last paragraph. I believe he's referring to when saying that the first paragraph on page 2, I think that's what he meant by the third paragraph. That's the first
It's
one
called
that I
third,
see.
yes.
Okay.
Now, what is this?
Mr. Valenti
But,
and I
but it is
understood each other.
ambiguous. Well, you two may have understood each other, but the purpose of the deposition is to create a record so that somebody else can understand it. And that's
Well,
why I'd like the witness to
I think-
slow down and allow me to interject my objections.
I think if Mr. Valenti and I can understand it, anybody can understand it.
All right.
Now, in the last paragraph on page 2,
The paragraph, what Professor Lessig
yes.
seems to find.
Is that agreeable with you, Mr. Cooper, if I call that the last paragraph?
It is.
Okay. Now, Do you recall the example that Professor Lessig used in the article?
I don't remember.
Well, let me ask, do you recall the article itself, Ms. Caruso's article?
The essence of the article is that Professor Lessig believes that if it's on the internet, it's free for the taking. I think that's the general belief he has.
And can you tell us who Professor Lessig is?
He was a law professor at Harvard. I think he's now at Stanford.
And do you recall him saying that as a teacher he had the right, or he understood he had the right, to take a piece of a DVD to use it for a lecture in class? Do you recall him saying that in the article?
I don't recall it, no.
Do you agree that a person teaching in a classroom such as Professor Lessig can take 3, 4, 5 minutes of a DVD and play it to his class?
Assumes facts, not in evidence. It's an incomplete hypothetical.
If you mean can he decrypt it, the answer is no. But he can get a DVD and fast forward to the 3 or 5 minutes he wants to play.
But he can't take it and put it off on something other than the original DVD.
Calls for a legal conclusion.
Is that right, sir?
I go back to my principle. You cannot circumvent an encryption for whatever reason.
So that if a librarian, for example, wants to use 2 to 3 minutes for a lecture, is she required to get a license from the DVD-CCA or the MPAA to use those 2 or 3 minutes?
Assumes facts, not in evidence. Calls for a legal conclusion and lacks foundation. I just don't
know what the
understand
legal
how we can
conclusion is on
continue to spend the deposition asking the witness increasingly more convoluted legal scenarios. He is not here to testify as a legal expert.
Go ahead, sir.
The answer is, if there's a legal conclusion to be drawn, I don't know.
Now, if a librarian or an academic wants to just use 2 or 3 minutes on some other thing other than a DVD that he bought originally, is there any way he can communicate with either the DVD-CCA or the MPAA so that arrangements for that can be made?
Unintelligible, assumes facts, not in evidence, and it calls for speculation.
Counsel, I don't understand what you mean.
If a teacher or a student, let's assume a student wants to write a paper on the Holocaust, and the student wants to use 2 or 3 minutes from Schindler's List, and she can't take the entire DVD and find the place and do that, but rather, as part of her own video presentation, she wants to take 3 minutes from Schindler's List. Is there a way that she can do that?
Ambiguous.
By contacting the DVD CCA or the MPAA and getting permission to de-encrypt to use those 3 minutes?
It's compound. He's testified a number of times that he doesn't know what the DVD-CCA is. So by importing that into your question, making it compound, I think you make it impossible for the witness to answer the question.
Let's restrict it to the MPAA.
I can't answer the question.
Let's restrict it to the MPAA.
I can't answer the question.
Why not?
Because I don't know what the answer is.
You understand the question. But do you understand the question?
Not really.
If a student wants to do a term paper, let's say do a video presentation on the Holocaust, do 20 minutes on the Holocaust, and wants to take 2 or 3 minutes from a DVD from Schindler's List to put into that Holocaust presentation, and she has to de-encrypt the DVD to do that, is that illegal?
Asked and answered. It's also calls for a legal conclusion. It's an incomplete hypothetical.
Go ahead, sir.
The student could do that by getting an analog version of Schindler's List, because that's not encrypted.
So that you can do that with an analog version. You can also do that, can you not, with a VCR?
Ambiguous.
Duplication of a movie.
Calls for a legal conclusion.
The answer is I don't know. You're getting me into some deep legal water here, and I don't know the answer.
You can also do that, let's assume if I rent a movie at Blockbuster. If I wanted to rent Schindler's List at Blockbuster, I could do that. Isn't that
Ambiguous.
right? In other words, the student could do that, take a little chunk of it, and then put it into her term paper.
Ambiguous, incomplete hypothetical calls for a legal conclusion.
I don't know.
You don't know whether it's legal or not.
Same objections.
Is that it?
The answer to that, I have to consult with my lawyers.
In other words, do you understand then that the ability to copy or take a piece of a DVD is different than taking a piece of something which is analog or taking a piece of, let's say, a VCR
Same
or a
objection.
videotape?
Same objections. It's compound. It's an incomplete hypothetical. Calls for a legal conclusion.
Go ahead, sir.
I don't have a legal conclusion to give you.
So, do you know whether or not a student can take, legally, a chunk of a Schindler List video and use that in a class presentation, either a student or a teacher?
Same objections.
I don't know what the legal conclusion is on that.
Now, if you take a VCR videotape, can you put that on the internet?
Incomplete hypothetical. Calls
Do
for
you
a
know
legal
whether or
conclusion,
not
and it's ambiguous.
you can buy a videotape of a movie and then put that on the internet?
You're asking technologically whether it's possible to do it?
Do you know whether the MPA has ever checked into whether or not you can take a rented movie and put that on the internet?
Ambiguous. You're asking whether it's possible, not
Go
whether
ahead,
it's
sir.
legal.
I don't know.
I presume you don't know whether it's possible or whether it's legal. Is that right?
I don't know to both of them.
Now, do you know whether or not you can take a video that you make, a duplicate, and then put it on the internet?
It's incomplete hypothetical. It's ambiguous. Calls for a legal conclusion.
I don't know.
Do you know if one can, let's say, videotape a pay-for-cable TV movie, let's say The Gladiator, and then take that movie and put it on the internet?
Same objections.
I don't know.
You don't know whether it's possible or whether or not it's legal, is that right?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's possible. I don't know whether it's legal.
Now, if there's been testimony or there have been affidavits in this case, if an academic writes an article,
If who?
an academic
Yeah.
writes an article about de-encryption and how DECS was arrived at, is such an article permissible,
Would you read?
or is that a violation of the law?
Would you read back the question, please?
If an academic writes an article about de-encryption and how DECSS was arrived at, is such an article permissible, or is that a violation of the law?
Calls for a legal conclusion. I also remind the witness, as with all of these questions, that if the only information you have is through attorney-client communications, not to reveal the substance of those communications.
I don't know what the legality is.
Do you know whether, have you tried to determine whether any academic articles are being written now that have the full DECSS in it?
Lacks foundation if you're asking about the MPAA.
I don't know.
Do you know if anybody at the MPAA knows that?
I don't know.
Have you tried to stop any academic websites that have DECSS on it?
By that you mean the MPAA?
Yes.
I don't know.
And do you know whether or not an academic can write an article describing how DECS was done, and we understand it was done through some people in Europe, and if he takes you step by step through the de-encryption process,
Ambiguous, incomplete hypothetical calls for a legal conclusion.
and he writes that article,
I don't know.
And if a student reading an academic article learns about circumvention, is what the teacher has done in giving him the tools of circumvention illegal?
Same objections.
I don't know.
If the student then is taught in class how DECS is constructed, and he then goes home and tries it out and makes a copy, is that illegal?
Same objections.
I don't know.
Now, with respect to a video, if a student is shown a video in class and goes home and makes a copy, is that illegal?
Same objections. There must be some end to the number of incomplete hypotheticals that you intend to present to this witness in order to ask him his legal opinion. Is there some point to trying to get this witness's legal opinion on all of these issues that might be relevant to the lawsuit?
Go ahead, sir.
I don't know.
Does the MPA have a position, to your knowledge, with respect to these issues I've been asking you about? And if,
I don't know.
Wait.
and if you want, Mr. Cooper, I'll just go through each of the issues by taking out the word "you" and putting in the word MPAA, but I think that's a waste of time.
I think the entire line of questioning has been a waste of time. With that, I agree.
Do you want me to go through the questions again? Or can
No,
we
I certainly
agree?
don't want you to go through the questions again.
So
No,
we can
I
agree
objected
then-
to each of them on valid grounds, so I wouldn't want you to repeat them.
But having objected to them, and your objection being noted, do you want me to ask each of those questions again with respect to the MPA, or can we agree that when he was asked those questions, you and his knowledge, it also relates to the MPAA?
No, I'll make no stipulation with respect to this line of questioning.
to your
unless
knowledge,
you want
then-
to stipulate to the fact that
Good.
they are irrelevant and objectionable on all the grounds I
To
just
your knowledge, then, does the MPA have a position on whether or not it's legal for an academic in an article to describe how DECS was arrived at?
I don't know.
Does the MPA have a position on whether or not an academic writing in an academic journal can set forth all of DECSS?
I don't know.
Does the MPA have a position as to whether or not a teacher in a class can write out DECSS to teach her students about cryptography or some other subject?
I don't know.
Now, if a professor in a law article wants to write about this case and refers to 2600.com as having had a mirror site, is that illegal?
Now you're asking whether it's illegal. You've changed course again?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Then it's objectionable on all the grounds of the previous questions in which you asked the witness his legal opinion.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
I don't know.
Does the MPA have a position on whether or not, if a law professor writing an article about this case refers to the 2600.com site, and through that site you can get DECSS, whether or not that law professor has committed something illegal?
I don't know.
Does the MPA have a position on whether or not, if a law professor writes about the DECSS site, and a student then reading that law review article, which either includes DECSS or includes a link to DECSS, then takes down the DECSS code, whether the student has done something illegal?
Would you read back the question, please?
Does the MPAA have a
Can you
position?
speak up?
Does the MPAA have a position on whether or not if a law professor writes about the DECSS site and a student then reading that law review article, which either includes a DECSS or a link to a DECSS, then takes down the DECSS code, whether the student has done something illegal?
Are you doing okay?
I'm doing okay. I'm managing.
Okay.
I don't know.
Has the MPA contacted any law professors and told them that they cannot refer to any site that links to DECSS?
Just before you answer, I want to make sure that it's clear that to the extent you know an answer to a question like that through a communication with counsel, you should not provide the substantive answer to the question.
I don't know.
And to the extent that a student leaves a law school class, having learned about this site through his teacher's instruction, if he then looks at DECSS and puts it in his hard drive, does the MPA have a position on whether or not that's legal or not?
Ambiguous.
I don't know.
And if the student takes the DECSS code that he's gotten in a classroom and gives it to someone else who does not download a DVD, is that illegal?
Ambiguous. And calls for a legal conclusion. And it's an incomplete hypothetical.
Go ahead, sir.
I don't know.
And if the student gives it to someone else who does make a DVD through the use of de-encryption, is that DVD made through the use of de-encryption illegal?
Same objections.
I don't know.
When you take a film in a movie house with a camcorder, can you then take that film and put it on the internet?
Would you read back the question, please?
When you take a film in a movie house with a camcorder, can you then take that film and put it on the internet?
Ambiguous, unintelligible. Are you asking whether it's physically possible to do
Yes.
it? Lacks foundation.
I don't know.
Do you know whether there have been any instances where people have gone in with camcorders and then taken the material from the camcorder and translated it to the internet?
Ambiguous.
I don't know.
Do you know of instances where movies have been shown on the internet where they have, very shortly after the release of the film and before DVDs or videos of that film are made available to the public?
Would you read back the question, please?
Do you know of any instances where movies have been shown on the internet where they have very shortly after the release of the film and before DVDs or videos of that film have been made available to the public?
Ambiguous.
Go ahead, sir.
I don't know.
Has any attempt been made to stop the New York Times from posting any linking sites, to your knowledge?
Ambiguous.
I don't know.
Have any attempts been made against any universities to stop them from posting DECSS?
Ambiguous.
I don't know.
Do you know anything about how this particular defendant was the defendant arrived at in the New York case?
Unintelligible. Asked and answered to the extent you're asking whether this witness knows how this defendant was selected.
Go ahead, sir.
I don't know.
When for the first time did you learn Mr. Goldstein's name?
Assumes facts not in evidence.
I think when you named him today.
Now, if you circumvent or decrypt to make fair use, is that MPA policy as being against the law?
Would you read back the question, please?
If you circumvent or de-encrypt to make fair use...
Say it again.
If you circumvent or de-encrypt to make fair use, is that MPA policy as being against the law?
It's compound. Assumes facts not in evidence. It's an incomplete hypothetical and calls for a legal conclusion.
Go ahead, sir.
I can't draw a legal conclusion.
Well, does the MPA have a policy that says that any time circumvention or encryption, de-encryption is used, that is not fair use?
Ambiguous. Calls for a legal conclusion.
I can't draw a legal conclusion.
You don't know the answer to that. So you don't know whether or not there are some proper and appropriate uses of circumvention and encryption.
Ambiguous calls for a legal conclusion.
Go ahead, sir.
I can't draw a legal conclusion.
So you don't know the answer to that.
No, as I said, I'm not a lawyer. I can't bespeak it.
Now, did you testify before Congress on the scope of fair use?
Ambiguous.
I may have. I don't recall.
And if you reverse engineer a DVD to use material, fair use material, does the MPA have a policy that that's against the law?
If you reverse engineer a DVD
Yes.
to make fair use,
Yes.
it's unintelligible. I don't even know what that is or what it could be, to reverse engineer a DVD to make fair use.
Do you know what that means, sir?
And it also calls for a legal conclusion.
I just don't know the legalities of that.
Do you know if the MPA has a policy with respect to that?
It's ambiguous, it's unintelligible.
I don't know.
Does the MPA... By the way,
Excuse me.
let me show you the letter previously marked as Exhibit 25, to which you're a signatory.
25, 23, 27, 24.
Which one is that?
25. Is that
25.
David O. Carson?
Right.
I think you said you were going to identify them for the record as you referred to them.
It's the March 31, 2000 letter by you to David O. Carson. By you and other people. You're a signatory.
I'll note for the record there's no signature on the
There's no
copy that I
letterhead,
have.
there's no signature.
This is the document that was turned over to me by the MPAA. You'd have to ask the MPA if there's any more information.
I don't understand how this... Oh, I see. See, this is not an MPA document. This is the document of all these different companies.
Okay, well, if he has any questions about it, he can ask you.
All right,
I direct your attention to page 2.
page 2.
The 6th line.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. While the association...
Yes.
All right.
Tell me what the disagreements are.
Talking about the disagreements referred to in the first clause?
Yes, about fair use issues and the proper scope of exceptions to the anti-circumvention provisions. Two separate issues.
I don't know.
Do you know what the MPAA's position is with respect to the proper scope of exceptions to the anti-circum provisions?
Read back the question, please.
Can you speak up?
Do you know what the MPAA's position is with respect to the proper scope of exceptions to the anti...
Proper what?
Scope of exceptions to the anti-circumvention provision.
Thanks.
Assumes facts not in evidence.
I don't know.
Now, you said you never heard... Let's go to the front of the page.
I never heard of what?
Let's go to the front of the document.
He's changing his question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Have you ever heard... You say you never heard of the DVD CCA, is that right?
His testimony has been, in your frequent questions on the subject, that he had not heard of it.
And you'd never heard of John Hoy, who's the head of the...
John who?
Hoy, H-O-Y.
No.
Take a look at page 2 of the letter.
Page 2. All right, what line do you want me to look at?
The bottom left. Is the DVD CCA a signatory to the same letter to which you're a
The
signatory?
document reflects the DVD Copy Control Association.
Yeah.
Do you know who they are?
I've never met Mr. Hoy, to my knowledge.
And you never heard of Mr. Hoy's name until I mentioned it today.
No.
Have you ever signed, to your knowledge, any other joint documents with Mr. Hoy?
Assumes facts not in evidence.
I don't recall.
To your knowledge, does the MPAA have any ongoing relationship with the DVD CCA, other than to sign joint letters?
Assumes facts not in evidence.
I don't know.
Do you know if there was a meeting in December between representatives of the MPAA and the DVD CCA in December of 1999 in California?
No, I don't recall such a meeting.
Have you looked at any of the depositions in this case?
No.
Have you spoken to Mr. Jacobson before you came to this deposition?
No.
What documents did you read prior to coming into this room, to refresh your recollection?
A document supplied me by my lawyers.
Now, which document was that?
The documents were my testimony, my 5 or 6 testimonies that I offered before Congress, public documents.
And was that all?
That's all.
May I have copies of what he saw this morning?
Oh, he didn't say he saw them this morning.
When
So
did
let's
you
just
say-
keep the record clear.
When did you say you saw them?
Oh, I saw them last week, I think.
May I have copies of those documents?
I'll take it under
I
advisement.
have no idea. I can't remember what they were.
All you saw were 5 or 6 public statements that you had made?
As I
And
recall.
did you see any internal documents of the MPAA?
I don't recall seeing any of those.
Now, let me direct your attention to Exhibit 23, which is your statement of October 28,
Hold on a minute,
1999.
This is October 28, 1999. All right.
Right, and I direct your attention to page 2,
Page 2.
last paragraph,
Beginning with what?
when piracy flourishes.
Okay.
And if you see in the middle of the paragraph, you say piracy is a $2 billion a year worldwide problem and growing. Can you tell me if you have any information about whether 1 nickel of that piracy loss relates to DECSS?
I don't know.
Has anyone at the MPAA, to your knowledge, determined whether there's been a nickel loss due to, or any loss, a penny loss, due to DECSS?
Ambiguous calls for a legal conclusion, and I admonish the witness not to include any information in his answer that comes from attorney-client communications.
I'm not aware.
Have you ever seen any documents that break down, internal MPA documents, that break down how these loss figures are arrived at? In other words, the sources of the loss.
And that's a reference to the loss figures set forth in Exhibit 23.
Yes.
I don't recall.
Doesn't the MPA make a breakdown? Is it your testimony that you don't recall seeing it, or that the MPA doesn't make breakdowns?
Is that the end of your question?
Yeah.
You're asking whether the MPAA has a practice of making breakdowns with respect to this reference
With
in
respect
this
to
document.
piracy losses.
Generally.
This is one of, well, this is one of them, but also in general.
I don't recall the format of this at all.
Well, have you ever seen, let's say, an estimate of how much is lost due to camcorders?
As distinct from other forms of piracy.
Right.
I don't recall.
Has anyone ever told you that they ever learned, do you know what a DVD burner is?
I'm not sure.
Do you have any understanding of it at
I've
all?
heard the term, but I really don't know what it means.
Do you know whether a DVD burner has ever been used to make a pirated copy of a DVD?
Calls for speculation. You're asking the witness now to use a term that he's not familiar with. If you want to give him a definition, he might be able to answer the question you intend.
May I hear the objection?
Calls for speculation. You're asking the witness now to use a term that he's not familiar with. If you want to give him a definition, he might be able to answer the question you intend.
Do you agree with your counsel's statement that I would have to give you the definition so that you could answer the question?
Yeah, why don't you give me a definition?
Okay. Now, let's mark as exhibit. Withdrawn. Is it already marked?
No.
As exhibit 28.
Exhibit 28. All right.
You don't have it yet.
Oh, okay.
A letter signed by you to Senator Dianna Feinstein. And I direct your attention.
The witness doesn't have the document yet.
Sorry.
By the way, do you have a computer at home?
Yes.
And do you use search engines?
No.
Do you use linking?
Ambiguous.
No, I don't.
Do you go online?
Email.
Do you surf the net, as that expression goes?
No, I read.
So do I. Starting the sentence, just a few keystrokes, if you'll take a look at it.
Now,
Where is the second
what page
paragraph?
are you on?
I'm on the first page, second page
This
of
is the
the
letter.
April 14th letter.
I got April
From-
15 letter.
That's
Turn it
the
over?
backup. Yeah. In other words, April 15th.
Oh, here we are. Okay, all right.
Well, let's take it slowly. So I want to
Page
make
2
sure.
of the Dianna Feinstein letter, written by you and others.
What I want to do, Counselor, I know that you would allow me. It's Diane. If you say Diana, I don't think she would like that very much.
I'll say Diane.
And I'd like the witness to take a few moments to read the document, all 3 pages,
Now,
so
wait
that he
a
can familiarize himself with
Let
it.
me read all 3 pages.
Sir, I have a tape change coming up. This might be a good time to do it.
Okay.
Changing to videotape 2, the time is 10:55, 20 seconds.